and welcome back to Eric Likes Animals, the podcast that gives you interesting environmental news and a unique species of animal every episode. I'm Eric Mahan, and I'll be your host on this journey. And if this is your first time listening, welcome and thanks for giving the podcast a try. And if you're returning, welcome back. I'm glad I haven't scared you away yet. Also, welcome to the second of our two Christmas special episodes for the month of December. As before, if you don't celebrate Christmas or don't like Christmas because you're a Grinch or a Scrooge, you will still enjoy this episode, so please don't click away. But for many of you possibly who do celebrate Christmas, this episode will be premiering on Christmas Eve, so a very Merry Christmas to you guys. So enough about holidays though, let's get started with some environmental news. First up, birds can experience road rage. A new study was recently published looking at how European robins' behaviors differ between the rural and urban settings. Previous studies apparently showed that robins in more urban areas were known to be a little more aggressive towards potential rivals than their rural robin friends. The normal response for a European robin, just FYI, is if a rival would to enter their territory, they would start by trying to sing a warning song and flash its feathers about to let them know if they do continue to come forward, then the next step will be fisticuffs. So, scientists placed two fake robins to study the reactions of the two different robin locations, and they would also play robin songs just to really sell the performance to any wild robins nearby the two different locations. One of the locations was more in a urban environment that had a lot of traffic noise nearby, while the other was in a more quiet little woods. What they found was when they would play extra vehicle noises in addition to the normal noises in the urban environment, the robins would actually start to sing less. The theory here is that they are used to the hustle and bustle of city living, and of course, with all the traffic noise, learn to just sit out and wait for the extra traffic to subside before trying to sing again to a rival. While the robins in the quiet woods were not used to traffic noises and would increase in their aggressive behaviors when traffic noises became more present, normally by getting closer to the decoys than normal and becoming more physically aggressive towards them. So some of the thoughts by the scientists was that the urban robins are more used to the noise, obviously, but many of them still rely more on physical aggression due to their environment having a lot of traffic noise messing up their territorial songs. So they have to rely more on displays to get their point across to rival robins. I guess just like people, when they are in busy traffic and a car cuts them off, they can't really hear you over all that noise, so just like the robins, we normally choose a more physical display like flipping the bird. Next, if you have never watched Jurassic Park with Mr. DNA, you may not realize how amazing DNA is and how it holds the building blocks for life on this planet. And thanks to modern day technology, we may not be able to bring back a T-Rex yet to chase Jeff Goldblum around, but we can start to read DNA and start to understand the stories they can tell of our past. In fact, just recently, the oldest bit of DNA ever found has been sequenced from a northern Greenland area to help paint a picture of what life was like 2 million years ago in that location. Currently, the area that they found this DNA in is considered to be a polar desert. But according to the DNA sample they took, it described that 2 million years ago, it seems it was very rich in life. In the soil sample they took, they found traces of mastodons, reindeer, and geese, along with plant life like birch and poplar trees. They even found some ocean life that included horseshoe crabs and algae. Now, just imagine for a second standing in what seems to be an empty, barren wasteland and to discover just 2 million years ago there was a huge and plentiful world of animals and trees right where you stood. Wow. The reason why the scientists even started using the DNA sampling in this region was that the fossils of this region were hard to come by. So they had to think outside the box to figure out how to learn about, how the environment was in this region's past. This DNA sampling, by the way, is also great for modern day animals, helping to be able to use the same sampling technique, but in water, we are able to trace if an endangered animal, such as a hellbender, which is a giant salamander of North America, was in a waterway or not, especially since hellbenders are notoriously very difficult to find simply by searching. But by using this technology, hellbenders in present creeks simply just need to have a piece of identified skin, poop, really any sort of cell to fall off of them, and scientists will be able to ID if hellbenders are present in those creeks, helping conserve them much more efficiently than simply looking around. Then finally, if you build it, frogs will come. A conservation slash research paper done in Switzerland has some positive results for amphibian conservation. Amphibians are one of the fastest declining groups of animals, with about 40% of the amphibians around the world being under threat of extinction. One factor is a fungus disease that has been spread by humans from different regions in the world. Another major problem for amphibians is that amphibians are losing their very specific and sometimes really rare homes to human development. Swamps, ponds, and rivers are being moved, drained, or being cut off so that amphibians can't even get to them. Most amphibians have very specific needs when it comes to places to breed. Vernal ponds, for example, are major breeding grounds for amphibians. Vernal ponds are a pond normally cut off from other regular water sources like creeks and rivers, and are really just places in the wild where rainwater collects. These vernal ponds also may even dry completely out depending on the time of year. But these are great places for many amphibians to breed because it normally does not have major predators like fish that would normally eat the amphibian eggs or larvae, or if it's a frog, we refer to it as a tadpole. These places are scattered around the wilderness, and if a city decides to build right where one is, sometimes it could end up taking away the only spot for amphibians to breed for miles around. So, now that you know all that, back to Switzerland. So a group of scientists decided to try and replace what we took away from the amphibians and decided to build ponds for the native amphibians to breed in near or in the urban areas that still had a somewhat active amphibian population hanging on in patches of the woods that still existed. Now, thankfully, they were already monitoring the amphibian data in this region thanks to some citizen science volunteers. So they actually had data that went as far back as 1999. They could compare data collected pre and post pond to see if it made any impact. The results of this pond project was that 10 out of 12 amphibians they were monitoring occupied more ponds in 2019 than 1999, and that 52% of the regional species that were listed as threatened saw population increase, and about 32% stayed stable, making the pond project a great success and another tool for conservationists to save a species. It should be noted this won't work with every species of amphibian, however. Some amphibians require a very specific kind of chemical makeup of the water that only comes from the right soil, plants, and other factors that make up the specific preferred natural vernal of those regions. So we should make sure we don't go out thinking we can destroy a habitat one place and just put some new man-made one somewhere else. Even though we like to think so, we still are not as clever as Mother Nature. And that is your environment news. So, it's the second and last Christmas special for this year. And it just so happens to be Christmas Eve. That is, if you happen to be listening to this when it came out, so to speak. And once again, even if you are the biggest Grinch in the world, or you just don't celebrate Christmas, I got you. And you can still very much enjoy this episode. But I do have to say, for you Christmas fans out there, I do want to make sure that it's a little bit extra special. So today we are going to be talking about one of man's oldest friends in the animal kingdom. Nope, not a dog. And no, it's not a cat. This old friend and the animal we are going to be talking about today is none other than the reindeer, or as some people refer to them, the caribou. Okay, so you might not actually know this, but we actually have domesticated caribou about 3,000 years ago, with some evidence even suggesting it was as far back as 7,000 years ago. They were domesticated by people living in the Arctic of Eurasia and are used for a variety of things like for milk, meat, and their hides. They also are used, of course, to help pull sleighs or wagons. and are even seen almost as many of us would see a dog. They are a member of the family and have jobs like being the leader of the caribou herd to help direct where the farmers want the herd to go. They even sometimes act like guard deer against possible predators, being a sort of reindeer alert system that the herd is under attack. I myself was actually lucky enough to work with one of them when I was first getting my bachelor's for zoo science. And it was one of my first animals I got to work with personally as I started my career in wildlife. Her name was Anya, and she was wonderful. She fully trusted me and even decided I need to smell like her, for she liked to scent mark me quite often with her scent glands on her face. Don't worry, it's not her pee, it wasn't that gross. To make sure she knew that I was part of the herd. She truly was an amazing creature, and it was just an awesome experience. So they definitely hold a very special place to my heart. And if you kind of heard me jumping between the name reindeer and caribou, they're kind of interchangeable. In Europe, they refer to them more as reindeer, and in North America, we normally refer to them more as caribou. Also, some people like to refer to domesticated caribou as reindeer and the wild ones, of course, as caribou. For the majority of this podcast, I am going to call them caribou, namely because it's fun to say. Say it with me, caribou. But they are interchangeable. Now, the domestic and the wild ones do look very similar, but for humans to classify something as domestic, it's normally a process that takes thousands of years, and instead of letting nature to decide which genes or features lets the animal survive and breed, it's actually humans that are messing with it. So they get an animal that they want. For example, something that's a friendlier attitude, a bulkier body for meat, or fluffier fur for better hide. So there's a lot that goes into it to domesticate something, and isn't something that you obviously want to do for a variety of animals. But 3,000 to 7,000 years ago, we decided, yeah, caribou and us need to get along. And if you're wondering where wild caribou can be found, they are found normally in the Arctic tundra and northern woods across North America and far north of Europe and Asia, preferring wide open frigid areas of tundra to cold northern forests. And if you're wondering how zoos and other facilities keep reindeers further south than, well, the Arctic tundra, it normally involves major, intense AC units because, yeah, without those, they don't do very well down in the south. Also, for whatever reason, if you ever do end up in the Arctic and you see a wild caribou, please do not run up to it and think you can hug it and give it pats on the head because, yeah, there is a difference between the domesticated caribou and the wild caribou, and that experience will not be as magical as you probably pictured it in your head. Especially since a lot of you probably have a certain image of what reindeer or caribou are supposed to look like in your head. And it's actually most of the time not what most people think. Because for a lot of people, they are basing it off of songs and poems saying things like 8 tiny reindeer. But tiny is really a perspective statement. It may not be as big as an elk or a moose, the two biggest members in the deer group, but I would not consider a caribou tiny and definitely not something you want to mess with. A male caribou can grow up about 28 to 53 inches or 70 to 135 centimeters tall from hoof to shoulder and be about 5.9 to 6.8 feet long. Females are a bit smaller at 5.5 to 6.2 feet long, and males can weigh anywhere from 143 to a whopping 529 pounds or 65 to 240 kilograms. And females can weigh 121 to 308 pounds or about 55 to 140 kilograms. In addition, a male's antlers can grow up to 51 inches or 130 centimeters long and weigh a whopping 33 pounds or 15 kilograms. Now, a really cool fact about caribou is that most other deer females don't have antlers, but female caribous do. Granted, they are much smaller than the males, but the fact that they have them in the first place is a really cool thing. The female antlers can grow up to 20 inches or 50 centimeters. So, first up, these things called antlers. is the major thing that makes a deer a deer. For the most part, the fact that either a male, or in this case, both a male and a female, have what are called antlers. Antlers do look very different from that of horns, but the basic difference that separates antlers from horns is that antlers are not designed to stay on the animal all year. And at some point in the year, the antlers will fall off of the animal naturally. And normally within a couple months, they'll start growing again for the next year. The reason they are not on their heads all year is they are freaking big and heavy and awkward. I mean, 33 pounds on the head of a male caribou, that's a lot to ask. So you may ask, what is the point of antlers then if they are not on their heads all year? For most deer species, and in this case, the purpose of the antlers for the male caribou is that it's for sparring with other males. They use them sort of for wrestling for dominance. The antlers are designed to lock into each other, sort of like if you would to take your fingers and interlock them together from each of your hands. The antlers help so they won't slip and keep their heads together, that is, till a great force pushes them apart. And that's the point, for one of them to be stronger than the other, to push the other off balance, or to overpower the other. And to the winner goes the spoils. They will claim about 5 to 15 females to be in his harem to breed. That group, however, won't normally leave the herd, but become kind of a smaller group within the larger herd, because still, there's safety in numbers, so it's not great wandering off. Herds have been recorded of reaching sizes of 10 to a few hundred for the small ones, and for so-called super herds, well, they can reach up to 50,000 to 500,000 strong. These herd sizes will change depending on the time of year, but no matter what, the caribou always likes to have a buddy nearby. Also, real quick, antlers are like snowflakes. Each one is different. Now, the basic design is normally the same, but how they grow with the branches and the points all can be shaped and made slightly different between each reindeer. But once the breeding season is over, off comes the antlers for the males, normally in November when the breeding season is over. Now, for the females, the reason why the females have the antler is completely different than the males, because females don't normally need to fight over territory, and they leave that to the meathead males. Nope, they have antlers for a very important reason, and that is to protect their young when they're first born. That's why they don't need really big and impressive showy antlers like the males for battling other rivals. They need to be light and sharp to help protect their young from things like bears, wolves, dholes, cougars, possibly even wolverine, lynx, golden eagle, or Arctic fox have been known to go after the young. Normally, a female caribou in a big herd have a good chance of outrunning these predators, but a brand new infant, not so much. When the female does give birth, it's normally around April to May after her long 7.5-month gestation period with her calf. Now imagine this poor female caribou, because first off, she's trying to survive the harsh winters, as well as being pregnant, and yes, having super awkward antlers to deal with on her head with this whole gestation period. Luckily for her, however, those antlers don't have to stay on too long. Normally only minutes after the youngster is born, it is up and ready to run. The female caribou will normally only have one youngster once a year, and they normally will hang around mom for about 6 to 8 months. When they do hit maturity, or at least mature enough to be more on their own, it's normally still within a herd. Peak maturity for the caribou, however, is in about 4 to 6 years, when they are more likely to be able to breed. Another reason antlers are probably smaller on females than males is because the female caribou actually have their antlers for a much longer time than the males. So yeah, makes sense. If you're going to have them on your head for longer, might as well be a little lighter. They don't want the 33-pound ones on their heads. That can stay on the males. The males lose them around the breeding season, like I said, normally around November, but the females need to protect their young, so a female caribou's antlers will actually not drop off till April or May, once their young are born and can run fast enough to get away from hungry predators. The antlers, however, are fairly large structures, and as quick as they grow, it still takes them a bit of time. So just weeks after losing them, you could actually start to see new antlers starting to bud on top of the caribou's heads. When the antlers are being grown, that area that they are growing from can be a little sensitive, and you don't see an antler start to grow like you might think. For at first, it's kind of this fleshy, furry looking, honestly, skin grow bag thing called velvet on their heads. These velvet house underneath the construction project, which is the assembling of the antler. When the antlers are growing under the velvet, there is a lot of blood flowing to this area, and it can be hard work for these deer's bodies, assembling this large solid structure which needs to be complete in only a couple of months, and be ready to also take a blow. Right before the breeding season begins, when the antlers underneath is complete, however, it will start to itch. The caribou will start rubbing their antlers on trees, rocks, or even using their feet, if they must, to try and scratch the velvet off because, well, it's done its job. It's made the antler. It honestly also, during this time period where they're getting the velvet off the antlers, can look pretty gruesome for people that don't know what's going on because the antlers can be covered in blood and hanging pieces of velvet, which is pretty much skin and fur. So it looks like if you stumble across a deer trying to rub their antler velvet off, like that deer just got done murdering a bunch of stuff and is now looking to murder some more. Okay? Yeah, it's pretty freaky if you don't understand what's going on. Also, side kind of weird, gross fun fact, many deer actually love to eat the velvet that comes off their antlers because it's like a tasty little snack that comes right off. This does not give you permission, however, to start eating your own boogers, thinking that you can do that if deer can eat their velvet. Because the reason the velvet is being eaten by these deer is because it's full of tons of nutrients of possible unused potential from building their antlers. So, to make sure they don't lose out on free unused nutrients, they eat it. Especially since, for the most part, especially the males, they are going to be going into the breeding season soon and fighting rivals, so eating isn't really at the front of your mind. And in a month or so after the breeding season has calmed down, it will start becoming hard to find food. So eating that velvet is important for the nutrients because winter is coming. Antlers are so amazing that scientists are actually trying to replicate them in lab settings because the potential there is unlimited, especially for medical purposes. Imagine if doctors could simply grow an antler bone replacement for a patient that completely shattered theirs. Not as good as a real bone, mind you, but not bad versus the only other option, which is kind of a metal rod. It would be a major breakthrough for us humans, but it would kind of be old news for deer species who have kind of been doing it already for a million or so years. Now, I imagine many of you like to say you know what a caribou or reindeer look like, but then again, I worked with elk and I heard a ton of people point and say, look, a reindeer, which, in all honesty, they don't look too much alike. Yes, they're both deer, but just in case you don't Google it, a reindeer or caribou is a large deer with a very thick coat. The fur is a more brown color in the summertime, and honestly, they look kind of very scraggly. They sort of look like a hot mess. Their fur is all messed up, and they really just look like they hate the summer. But in the wintertime, it's a big, thick, luxurious coat with a slightly gray color, which kind of helps match the fur with the most common colors to the season in the location to help blend them in more. So brown for the summer, grayish for the winter. They have a pale colored chest and underside, which goes along to their back end and up their rump to even underneath their tail. They have decent sized ears, perfect for hearing far away, and a large nose that actually acts like an air heater. The caribou's nose really looks like a large square on their face. The nose is jam-packed full of blood vessels, which actually help by cooling the air coming out of the caribou in a way that it doesn't actually end up losing any extra heat. But when the caribou breathes in air, the nose then helps warm up the air in a way that then it won't get brain freeze. Because sometimes during the year, the air gets that cold. And the last thing a caribou wants is to get brain freeze when a wolf is approaching you. Yeah, you kind of need to stay fully focused when that happens. And I do highly suggest Googling this, but because of the red blood cells that are running through the vessels of the caribou's nose, there are photos of certain caribou that do seem to have red noses, which might be a more common sight if it wasn't for the fact that caribou, unlike many other deer species, have fur all over their noses. This also helps with the regulation of air coming in and out of their body, but all that fur kind of blocks your view of the very red nose underneath. But hey, it's survival, which a little more important than looks. Their next tool they have, their feet, are both stylish and super handy for the winter. The caribou have wider and flatter looking hooves compared to most deer, but they are extremely special for that reason because, baby, these feet are made for walking. In summer, when the ground is extremely soft from the snow melt and other weather, the hooves will expand and become more like a sponge. This helps them gain traction in the sometimes very squishy, mushy ground. In the winter times, however, the hooves will shrink and tighten, exposing more of the rim of the hoof, which helps cut through the hard snow and ice. The hoof itself actually helps, just like a snowshoe being so wide, and helps keep the deer up on top of the snow instead of sinking down. And don't worry, we are not done with the cool features of these hooves yet, because they also have built-in anti-toe clog systems, where they have hair that is set between the two sides of the hoof that are found on each foot in a way that snow won't get clogged in between their toes. In fact, they also have very fuzzy feet, with even some fur on the bottom of their feet to help with the stability and keeping their feet warm. Okay, that's it for feet. Just kidding, one more. The clicking of the reindeer feet, many poems and songs may talk about, like Up on the Housetop, click, 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 actually don't come from the hooves themselves, but these tendons in their joints that click or snap on their bones as they walk. And nope, someone didn't mess up building them. It's not a poor design, and it's not something that only old caribou do, but younger ones do it as well. Experts theorize the reason behind the reason for the click is it's a way for members of the group to hear or know where each other is during times of heavy fog and bad snowstorms when visibility is hard. It can keep everyone on course as they travel so they don't get separated and wander off in a blizzard, because a lone caribou is normally a dead caribou. Imagine if you're a caribou resting in a snowstorm, for instance, and you can't see anything, but all of a sudden you hear a number of click noises and you hear which way they are going. Well, then you can tell something has probably spooked other caribou and know which way is the most likely safest route, because who knows? Someone in the group might have smelled or saw a wolf. I wish the clicks in my joints had a better purpose than just making me sound weird when I stand up sometimes, but hey, we all can't be caribou. Now, you may be thinking, okay, what's with the feet? Why so many different features? It's because these feet, like I said, are made for walking, and walking is what they do. The North American caribou migration, for example, has been recorded of having a migration of about 600 to 3,000 miles, or 4,828 kilometers in a year, which is one of the longest migrations of any other land mammal, mainly because of the changes in weather, but also to find enough food and hope they don't become, well, food themselves. So, yeah, they need to walk a decent bit. Luckily, however, besides just some joint clicks, they have another way of warning their fellow caribou a predator is near. They have scent glands at the base of their ankles that, when they sense that there is danger, they will rear up in the air and release the scent gland smell into the air, sort of acting like a stink alert system, not to be confused with and not by the same people that brought you Life Alert. What's that smell in the air? It's Toby. Help. I've fallen, and I'm being eaten by wolves. Well, shame for Toby. Let's not go that way. They have more stink power as well, with scent glands near their eyes that, when opened and in use, sometimes does look like a caribou has two sets of eyes. These scent glands, however, are normally used to mark territory and, of course, each other, so everyone knows who all truly belongs in the herd. But Don't worry, that's not all that makes the caribou special. Yep, they got a lot of special features, and one of them is their very special eyes. One thing with their eyes is they see in colors we cannot. Caribou can actually see in UV light. This is really helpful for an animal that for many months out of the year, everything around them looks like the same, just pure white snow everywhere. With the ability to see with UV light, this can help add differences in the environment we as humans can't even imagine or see. For a caribou to be able to describe to us what things in UV look like would be as difficult as someone trying to describe the color red to someone who is colorblind. Also, it would be very difficult for a caribou to describe something to us in the fact that, well, they can't speak. One benefit of seeing in UV is they can see urine and fur extremely easily, even from far away. Urine is actually extremely bright to things that can see in UV light, even giving some animals the ability to track other animals not by smell, but by seeing urine trails from animals. That's why urine shows up so well under black lights. A black light can partially identify some things that do have UV color to them for us humans, but not too often. The caribou can use these super pee and fur sight to help follow the herd. It can also help ID spots to check out and sniff to make sure that a wolf is not nearby. But don't worry, these special eyes are not just for seeing pee. It also just so happens that reindeer's favorites, and let's be honest, few options that they eat, happens to be bright under UV light. This helps caribou be able to spot their favorite food from extremely far away, like a glowing beacon of yum, whereas the rest of us would just see white snow everywhere. Some of their favorites are lichen, moss, and other such vegetation. And when it's wintertime and the snow is down everywhere, it is when those special ice and snow digging hooves come in handy to help dig up the vegetation. Now, these items, plus, of course, grasses and sometimes trees, is a majority of their diet. But some evidence out there say that caribou may even dabble into eating bird eggs and lemmings, which is a small Arctic mammal, which may be a big shock for a lot of us, but when all of a sudden you think, well, they do live in a harsh environment, and in that case, calories is sort of everything. So, just like when they were eating their velvet to save on nutrients, it's not really that big of a jump that they may on occasion to help put on fat or muscle and to get through these hard, cold, very dark winter months, kind of switch over to a little more carnivorous diet. And I don't think really the word dark gives what they go through justice because they live far enough north that they do experience the extremely long dark periods and extremely long bright days that happen when you go to either side of the earth near the poles. The far north, due to how the sun hits the earth, can experience 60 plus days of total darkness in the winter, but then in the summer experience 60 plus days of 24-hour light. That's a major change that does a lot to an animal, more than just simply needing to change a winter coat to a summer coat, especially since, unlike bears, the caribou are fully awake and trying to deal with the harsh winters and complete darkness after all. Well, luckily they do have a solution to that, and it's simple. Change your eyes. Oh, do I need to explain it a little more? All right. So, this is a more recent discovery that besides the fact that they have long lashes and special slits in their eyes to help cut back on the glare the sun can create on the snow, the actual color of a caribou's eyes can change every 6 months. And there is a very special reason for it. In the summer, the reindeer's eyes are golden, and in the winter, they are blue. Now, I should say that this is not easily seen on a live caribou, so don't be sticking your face next to them to see because the change happens more internally in the eye, so you probably won't see anything and most likely get bonked on the head by a caribou antler. So, the scientists who started researching it have figured out why the changes happen in the first place. In the summer, the sun is out and there is multiple colors found in the light spectrum available just as we are used to. So, plenty of colors to see and use to make sense of the world around them. But when it's wintertime and it's at least to us total darkness, it may not be as dark as we think. Low level blue light and yes, UV can be present at least parts of those nights, meaning animals that see in those light ranges almost get their own built in night vision, which, as you think about it, makes sense why the White Walkers in Game of Thrones had blue eyes. In the dark and cold, those blue eyes, like the caribou, would give them the ability to see things others could not in the dark and snow, like pee. Or most likely, the reason why the White Walkers in Game of Thrones have blue eyes is because, well, it looked cool. Now, you may be thinking to yourself, there can't be anything left about the amazing caribou, right? Because we just went through so many fun, interesting facts about them. And nope, there's still more because they are pretty much a Santa bag full of cool facts. They have some pretty impressive fur for survival as well. Caribou, first off, have actually 2 layers of fur to them to help keep them warm. The first layer is a dense, wind impenetrable layer of fur, while the top layer of fur is actually hollow. This is to help insulate the caribou like a fluffy air blanket. But that's not all this air fur can do. A really cool feature is that their fur makes a caribou very buoyant. Yep, that hollow fur acts like a cork and makes a caribou, well, very floatable. A very handy trick for their long migrations, since sometimes you don't have time to walk around a lake or even a river, even if it's not frozen. So, best way to get from A to B sometimes is jump on in and go for a swim. And sorry, yep, another feet fact again. These wider hooves on a caribou are excellent in helping the caribou do the reindeer paddle across the water. Now let's talk about conservation stuff with them, because yeah, they are super cool, as you just heard. But unfortunately, according to the IUCN Red List, the caribou is considered a vulnerable population, decreasing. Now, I'm sure you might have guessed it. I'm sure humans are a big part of why, because of, well, destruction of habitat like logging, especially for more southern reindeer populations. Not very great. Another major issue is oil exploration and industry looking for resources hidden under the snowy tundra. These facilities have disrupted important caribou migration routes and cut off vital grazing areas. And yes, another big one for caribou is, since they are north like other northern animals like polar bears, global warming, climate change, all that sort of stuff. Because the Arctic is warming up quite quicker than the rest of the parts of the world, which is a pretty big factor for the caribou. For one, the caribou don't do well in warmer areas, and neither does their food. Plus, with warmer weather comes these really annoying neighbors from the south, white-tailed deer, which have started pushing north with these ever-growing populations far exceeding their normal natural range, and have started invading and taking resources away from the poor caribou. But if that wasn't bad enough, what lies actually inside the white-tailed deer may be the true devil to look out for. Because there are a number of white-tailed deer that have something called brainworm, a nematode worm parasite spread by white-tailed deer and sometimes mule deer. But it is normally the white-tailed deer that don't show signs of this parasite, unlike other deer species. And with them coming north, so does this parasite. So this brainworm does not normally present signs in the carriers like white-tailed deer, but can be extremely deadly to others like the caribou, and in fact also the moose, the largest of the deer species. General signs of this parasite is weakness, poor body condition, blindness, possible difficulty of moving hind limbs, walking in circles, and having other neurological issues, just to name a few. It can spread from feces of an infected animal, and then either a caribou can accidentally ingest some of the feces, or another animal like a snail or a slug eats the infected feces and gets the worm. And then accidentally that snail or slug gets eaten by a caribou as it's eating a plant. Wild plants, if you didn't know, many wild animals have to eat, come with a healthy topping of insect sprinkles. Or in this case, slug sprinkles. Yes, I said sprinkles, not jimmies. I grew up in an area where we said sprinkles. The brainworm can most of the time lead to death, especially with the animal's ability to function normally, feeding itself and escaping from predators becoming more difficult. Unfortunately, there is not currently a treatment for affected animals with brainworm. With the most humane method for these animals that are showing the symptoms that do seem too far gone, humane euthanasia is normally the best thing to prevent long-term suffering of the animal, because in the end, no matter what, it'll lead to death. Also, euthanizing the animal earlier than when the disease takes it actually stops further the spread of the disease to other animals. Now, normally they don't euthanize till the signs are pretty obvious because to truly ID if the animal has brainworm or not by test, that's only done through a necropsy by seeing the adult worms inside. Because unlike other parasites, it's not easy to identify within the feces of an infected animal. Also, if the animal is acting like this, it may not even be the brainworm, but another disease that is also considered deadly with no real treatment that wouldn't have larvae in the stool. Chronic wasting disease. This one is with a prion, which is an abnormal protein that infects the deer and damages the neurological system, brain, spinal cord, lymph nodes, and it's 100% fatal. And is spread through bodily fluids, direct contact, and indirect contact via water and food. And this guy's a lot more intense than the brainworm because this one does not care. It is going after all deer species. Chronic wasting disease messing with their neurological system, of course, leads to abnormal behaviors that are very similar to the brainworm. And like the brainworm, best case situation for an infected animal is still to be humanely euthanized by the proper authorities, aka local fish and game commission people. The chronic wasting disease is similar to mad cow disease and currently has no effect on people. But some states are advising hunters to possibly test any deer they killed during hunting season in areas that have confirmed cases of chronic wasting disease. This is important to help the people looking into the spread of these diseases on how it's spreading and how bad it's getting. Both diseases really are no joke and cause for a lot of concern for all deer species, not just caribou. And it seems pretty glim right now, but you still want to know how to help the caribou, right? Well, greener practices and not over hunting herds of caribou are kind of great starts. Encouraging greener practices can help cut back on the need for humanity to want to drill for oil in caribou homes. And with less oil burning, we can cut back on greenhouse gases, which then can start to cool the planet back down a bit. Let's make the North cold again. This will help discourage white-tailed deer from coming north and keep certain diseases then away from caribou. As for the chronic wasting disease, one that does make environmentalists right now very nervous, a big way to help is with observation, being vigilant, reporting signs of weird behaving deer to the proper authorities. If you think you have an infected deer nearby, the professionals can come out and help figure out what's wrong with it and take the proper course of action. This may make you think I don't want to call them because you don't want them to then kill the deer. But remember, if they do decide to put it down, it's because it pretty much is dead already. And by putting it down now, it would stop the animal suffering and reduce the chance of it spreading and disease taking away more deer. Another thing which may seem weird because we want to make sure we don't lose the different deer species is actually the prevention of overpopulation of deer, because the more deer clustered unnaturally close by in the wild, the more chances the disease has to spread and become a new variant that could then spread quicker and become more deadly. Plus, more deer, more paths for the disease to travel to reach different parts of the wild. Another big one for you at home is in general not a good idea to begin with before the disease, but especially not now with the disease, is please stop baiting deer. Baiting of high value things like corn and apples or whatever in people's backyard creates high traffic areas multiple deer will then come and cluster around that wouldn't normally happen in the wild. People do this because they think they are helping the deer by providing them food to help survive the winter, or just simply they want to see deer in their backyard. Hunters also will be ones known for baiting to get deer to constantly start coming to the same spot, but once again, creating high traffic zones where a lot of deer will visit increases the chance of spread of the disease. It's as simple as one infected deer coming into that area, eating some food, and then spreading it to 20 other deer that are also there as well. Hey, listen, I get it. You think you're helping and that you really want to help the deer and love seeing them. But to love them, sometimes you do have to let them survive on their own. It's not great feeding wild animals because you don't want the animal to then become dependent on you and stop looking for food naturally. Plus, feeding the deer like that, they become used to being closer to people, which means that they don't stay away. And that actually increases the number of deer that can get hit by cars more often. And also, sorry, don't want to sound preachy, the food most people feed the deer, not great for them. I know apples are good for us, but remember this is an animal that eats grass and leaves, so a high sugary apple definitely a little more impact on them than us. If you do want deer to visit, do your research on native plants and other more natural things you can do to create more little pit stops for deer versus a giant gathering feast fest for the deer in the woods near you. Because what you do in your backyard may help decide the fate of many animals all across the globe, even as far north as the Arctic, where the amazing, full of tricks caribou lives. And that's the show. Thank you guys so much for listening. I know this was a longer one. I hope you enjoyed, however, hearing about the caribou, a unique, amazing creature that has more tricks up its sleeve than a birthday magician. As always, please make sure to rate and share the show on whatever platform you use. This greatly helps me reach more people and keeps pushing me forward to get better ideas for the show and really just pumps me up. Speaking of platforms, make sure to check me out on either Facebook, Twitter, TikTok, or as always, you can email me at ericlikesanimals@gmail.com if you want any more information, of course, and have questions. Or you just want to say hi, and all the information, by the way, will be found down in the show's description footer. And I just want to say happy holidays for everyone celebrating any of the many awesome holidays going on this time of year. And of course, a very Merry Christmas for everyone else, especially if you do happen to listen to this episode the day it comes out on Christmas Eve, or maybe the next day on Christmas Day. And I know it might be a little last minute. If you're still looking for something for the wild deer that come to your backyard, I have a great one for you. Maybe this year, just get them a little something, maybe a little pile of tough love. I know it's going to be tough. But in the long run, it's going to be better for them. And more importantly, it's going to be better for a lot of different deer species. Thank you guys once again for listening. 2022, been a crazy year. First year of the podcast. Can't wait to see you guys again in 2023. Thank you guys once again for listening. I'm Eric Mahan.